And I'm the co-president and co-founder of the Black Film Critics Circle. I created this with Wilson Morales, who's sitting here with me today. And we created the Black Film Critics Circle specifically because as film critics, we were always in the minority. And I won't get into the politics of film publicity, but let's just say that we kind of felt, wow, there's all these critics groups from different towns, different, there's online critics, there's New York critics, Chicago critics. How come there's no organization for critics of color? So that's why we started that. And just recently, I have to acknowledge that one of our members, who is just like Wilson, half Black and half Latino, started a Latino film critics group as well.
So, that's saying Black twice, you know.
I know I said Black twice. But I say that to say that it's important because we feel that the kinds of films that represent us, people of color, need to be reviewed by us, just like we're looking to be able to tell our stories, not because our stories can't be told by people who aren't of color, but because they traditionally have been. And now that things have changed, especially when, like what Warrington talked about in the 90s, and that group of filmmakers, what you could call the second golden, or really the third golden age of Black filmmakers, it changed everything. Every time a film came out, it became a new genre for Black film. When Warrington made House Party, all of a sudden the silly comedy with Black folks, that became a genre.
It wasn't silly.
It was funny. But that became a genre. We had, Friday and a whole series of films.
Friday was silly.
Yeah. So then after that, we had the Hood film, which, Boys in the Hood essentially created what they call the Hood film. But the Hood film is really something that's been around a long time. And it's a crime drama. And crime drama's been around forever. We all know crime dramas. We all know that villains or bad guys are actually a lot more interesting than good guys. There are more people who like Darth Vader than like Luke Skywalker. So that should tell you something. But what John Singleton did is not so much begin a genre for Black film with Hood films, is that he was really looking at Black culture. He was showing us, there are a lot of films that filmmakers who were not of color, who were not of the environment they were maybe making a film about, would show the what. Okay, you might see crime, you might see prostitution, you might see drugs, you might see all kinds of things that may exist in the community, but you never see the why. And that's really important, to understand why things are the way they are. To understand these people as human beings, not just a statistic or something on the news. For most people, Boys in the Hood was the first time they got any sense of what South Central was other than what you've seen on the news. And that's significant. That's what part of the power of film. Film can be something that transports you someplace, to a life you would never leave, to people you would never meet, especially foreign films. And one of the other things that has now happened as a result of those filmmakers and what's happening in Black film, now we're getting to see that films about people of color, they travel. They can be seen in other countries. Our stories are important. And there's no greater champion, I would say, than John Singleton of dealing with who we are, showing who we are, warts and all. And there's so many great films he did. Now, each of the critics here today, including Wilson, my co-president, each of the critics here have picked a scene from their favorite John Singleton film. And for me, John Singleton means a lot more than just a great filmmaker as a film critic, because I am a filmmaker too. And he came to the premiere of my film. That's how supportive he was. He was there. I have photos of me with John Singleton at the premiere of my film. For me, this was like 1998, 1999. This was such a, I had looked up to him for years. Every film he came out with, from Boys in the Hood, Poetic Justice, Higher Learning, each one had something that was dealing some aspect of Black culture that we hadn't really seen before. And each one had a really clever title too. So then he went on to produce, so we're going to talk about that too. So we're really going to kind of encapsulate his career, what it meant to each of us, why we chose those films. For me, it has to do with gender politics, but for each of them, them being these critics here in the first row, they will tell you why they chose the clip they did. But our first critic is Aramide Tinubu, who is a member of the Black Film Critics Circle. And come on up, you can tell us your clip, set it up for us, and then we're going to look at it. She'll tell you why she chose it.
I chose the opening scene. Oh, excuse me. I chose the opening scene of Poetic Justice. I really always felt that Singleton was able to just drop. Sorry, can you guys hear me now? Okay, I chose the opening scene of Poetic Justice. I felt that Singleton has always been able to just drop people, his audience, into the characters' lives without any setup, without any sort of context. And really this banter that you see between between Janet Jackson and Tupac when they first meet each other is really interesting. I think that it really shows the way young people talk to each other, especially in heteronormative situations when men are trying to talk to women. And what Justice does in this situation is she really sort of throws something unexpected back at Tupac's character, which I've always really liked. So that's sort of my intro to the clip.
Yo, what's up, what's up, what's up? What's up, Mr. Postman? You got no spare change, man?
Nah, but I got a spare stamp so you can mail your ass a job application. Begging ass motherfucker. Y'all ain't getting up, girls.
Why you always so mad? You must ain't got no man because you don't never smile. Do you?
What do you want from me?
Nothing. Think you kinda fly? Shit. You can start with your phone number.
What's your name?
Lucky.
Lucky.
Yeah.
Come here, Lucky. I want to whisper something to you. Let's cut the bullshit, okay? Now, what do you really want from me? You want to smell my punani?
Yeah. Yeah.
You like that, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Hold on a minute, baby. Jesse?
Yeah.
Come here for a minute, please. What? This fine, young, dark brother said he wanted to smell my punani.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Punani.
Mm-hmm. Shall I?
Yeah.
You need to get your ass some breath mints.
Get your ass out of here.
Don't smoke it. Take a stamp too.
Oh, God bless you, brother. God bless you, man.
So basically, that's always been one of my favorite scenes. I just love the fact that what she does is completely unexpected, and he's really taken aback because he doesn't know how to approach that. It was just really interesting in the way that the scene was written.
Okay. So next we're going to go to the podium. Next time we're going to go to the podium. Next we're going to go to Clayton Davis. Clayton, come on up. And I will force Clayton to introduce his website. He's got a pretty well-known website as well, so he can tell you where you can follow what he says and does.
Thank you, Mike. Hello, everyone. My name is Clayton Davis. I am the editor and owner of awardcircuit.com. What you guys probably don't know about it, we follow the awards race, in particular the Oscars and I've always just had a fascination with the Academy Awards. John Singleton represents something big within that group. And what I'm about to tell you, most of you probably already know this in the room, but I'm going to tell you through the eyes of a millennial like myself. I grew up in Bronx, New York, before I moved to Jersey. And when I was there, I didn't get exposure to film, historical films in particular. Last year, I was fortunate enough to host a few movies on Turner Classic Movies for their Black experience on film. And it was a really great experience. One, so that it wasn't held in February. It was actually outside of February, which was a huge deal for that. And I had to host the evening that talked about coming of age films in the Black community. And I walked into it with 4 films to review and talk about, one of which was Cooley High, which is like the quintessential like Black film, everyone knows it. One of them was called The Learning Tree by Gordon Parks. I had never even heard of the movie up until that point. At this point, I'm a critic now for about 11 years, had no idea what it was about. And I came into it completely blind and saw so much of the man that I've admired in the Oscar community, because he is the youngest director ever nominated for Academy Award at 24, and the first Black filmmaker nominated for Best Director. And that's 1991. The Oscars are going on 91 years old now, today. And I look at that now and see how we don't understand Black filmmakers more so. And that's coming from outside, we could say like, white people don't understand Black people and all that. More so, as someone who's half Black, I don't know if I fully understand Black cinema yet. It's something that I need to learn because there isn't enough examples out there for me, or better yet, there's not enough things that I've been exposed to from a young age till now. I'm discovering this now at the age of stern form. So I say that now, setting up this clip from Boys in the Hood. It's the final scene in which Ice Cube and Cuba Gooding Jr. are speaking, and what I believe this scene encapsulates more so is manhood within the Black community, and what that really means. When I grew up in the Bronx, I was living in the projects, and then when my mom took us out of the projects and moved us to Jersey, I had like kind of this whole epiphany. I was living among the Black community, but I'm not dark skinned, so I wasn't Black enough for the Black people. And then when I moved to Jersey, I was among Puerto Ricans, and I'm half Puerto Rican, but I didn't speak Spanish, so I wasn't Puerto Rican enough for the Puerto Rican people. I'm not white, so I'm not white enough for the white people. So I needed to find my own culture, my own way. Film became my way. And in this scene, Ice Cube, who's in it, is vulnerable for the first time. And that vulnerability, I see inklings of it within the Black community sometimes, and it's quickly, the door's put up again to be hard, because for whatever their surroundings are affecting them, they don't let themselves be vulnerable like that. So watch this clip from Boys in the Hood, and then I will give you a little bit of a reflection of what it means to me personally. Okay? And you can go.
What's up?
What's up? Yo, cuz. I know I got the call last night. Should have been there in the first place. You don't want that shit to come back to haunt you. You've been up this early a long time. Turned on the TV this morning. Had the shit on about living in a violent world. Showed all these foreign places. Foreigners live in all. Start thinking, man. Either they don't know, don't show, or don't care about what's going on in the hood. Man, all this foreign shit. I ain't have shit on my brother, man. I ain't got no brother. Got a mother knee. She love that food more than she love me.
Dope boy. Got some blow, got some rock?
Get the fuck out my face! Keep them goddamn babies off the street. Y'all get him? I don't even know how I feel about a nigga, man. Shit just goes on and on, you know. Next thing you know, somebody might try to smoke me. Don't matter though. We all gotta go sometime. Seems like they punch the wrong clock on Rick though, man. You gotta go, cuz. Hey, dog. What's up?
You still got one brother left, man.
Thanks, man.
Family was something that John Singleton touched a lot on in his films. But the essence of family isn't just connected to blood. And I think that was one of the greatest things that he would hone in on, because personally in my life, you know, I have brothers and sisters that are related to me and or, you know, lived in my house. I looked for family outside of that because it wasn't always as together as you want it to be. And you look for other places to find connection. John Singleton, in this scene in particular, Ice Cube is vulnerable to someone that's not related to him, speaking about his own experiences with his family and fighting tears, like, because you can't cry when you're a man. And in that moment, he switches to a realization like someone may smoke me, his realization about death, and how he just like perks up and he's like, it's something that it's a foregone conclusion to him. And just how men interact with each other within the Black community, and how we have this preconceived idea of what a man is supposed to be and what they're supposed to allow themselves to feel and not feel. John Singleton taps on it so much within his filmography. He made 9 films in his career, which I call 27 in Spielberg years. You know, like he got to express a lot, and it's because of him, I believe today. I mean, this comes out about 2 to 3 years after Do the Right Thing, Spike Lee. Spike Lee's snubbed for an Academy Award in director, and here comes this young kid, 24 years old, puts this out. And I thoroughly believe because of that is why we have Barry Jenkins today, and why we have Lee Daniels, and why we have Ava DuVernay. You know, we're still waiting for our first black female to get in there, and we have a chance now to see it come to fruition because, you know, John paved the way for a lot of this new generation. So that's my personal connection to it. I know it's a very popular favorite of John Singleton's, but every film speaks to everyone just a bit differently. So that's it. Thank you for your time today.
Okay. Next, I'm going to introduce my co-founder and co-president, Wilson Morales. And Wilson, let me just say this. Wilson is someone who is the epitome of what, you know, when I'm around people who aren't film critics, the way I describe a film critic is that they're film geeks gone legit, okay? And these are people who love film and who can talk about film, who are knowledgeable about film. We can talk all night about film. And Wilson's one of those rare people. And when I met Wilson, I was doing radio. And Wilson started in radio, but he was also he was a part of something called Black Film. And it was in its infancy then. It is what it is today because of Wilson Morales. Wilson.
Hi. So, you know, me and Mike have worked together on radio, and we've gone our separate ways, but we continue to work together as part of the founders of Black Film Critics Circle. I can't recall the first time I met John, but I know that we've met several times after that. And then the thing that I got working with and talking with John is that, like, he was always real. You know, like, you meet filmmakers and you're in awe of them, you know their accomplishments. By that time, you know, he already had Boys in the Hood and Poetic Justice and Higher Learning. And then you wonder, like, what are you gonna say to the guy? It's the same thing when people see Spike Lee or anybody else. It's like, what am I gonna say to him? Is he gonna be receptive? Is he gonna really hear me out? And we talked to John, and if anybody here ever talked to John, he always just kept it real with you, you know? Talk to you as if you're friends, even though it's the first time you're meeting. And whatever you said, you know, he was always candid. You know, he wouldn't hold back. Sometimes people, whether you're an actor, producer, would scale back and they'd be reserved because they don't know who you are. They don't know, this is way before social media, they don't know where you're gonna take what they said to you and what you will make out of it. But with John, you know, he spoke to you. Then he would see me over time and he would know who I am. And that was always something to me, like, oh, he knows who I am. So either he's read my stuff or we've seen each other over time. But the thing about John that I remember is that, like, after Boys in the Hood and Poetic Justice, and nearly 10 years later, he was helping others. And, you know, the scene I'm gonna choose is from Hustle and Flow because I remember getting a phone call from a publicist, Cassandra Butcher, if anyone knows her. And she calls me up and she tells me, oh, Wilson, I need you to talk to John for a quick second. He's producing a film, you know, not directing it. And it was a film, as we know, you know, that pretty much reintroduced Terrence Howard to the big screen. What's interesting is that the film that he got nominated for Best Actor, and it was, Terrence already had 40 films to his credit, but yet, you know, Hollywood called him a newcomer. And, you know, John found Craig Brewer, who had his vision. I remember speaking to John, he goes, this guy has what I had in 91, 92, and we saw Hustle and Flow, and you kind of, you know, even though it was Craig Brewer's vision, but you knew that John had helped him with it, along with Stephanie Lane. And so the scene I'm choosing is a scene between Terrence and Taraji Henson, in which DJ is ready to go to meet the character played by, why am I losing names? From Fast and Furious.
Tyrese?
No, not Tyrese.
Anthony Anderson?
Yeah. No, exactly. Anyway, before I start losing it. But what you see in the movie is the scene that shows you a case of love between Terrence's Howard character and Taraji's character. And you've seen love displayed in Singleton's films, whether it was in Boys in the Hood, Poetic Justice, Higher Learning. There's always that one scene that we get that gives you that emotional impact of the film. When you see the scene, you'll see it, and then I'll give you more thoughts about it.
This was my dad's watch. I used to work for the school district and all, fixing them buses all over town. I see them buses go by today, I get all excited. Say my daddy used to work on that. And I know after he'd been there maybe about 10 years or so, gave him this and kind of thought about burying him with it, but then again I said, man, maybe I should keep it as an heirloom, you know what I mean? What?
Last night, I've been watching the videos and all, and it be like all the rappers, they got some chain.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. Y'all always talking about your name being right and everything, so I thought people, could see how you like it spelled out, with the J-A-Y.
Damn. This shit is perfect, man. I want to see it, man.
Okay.
What?
I get like this because I'm pregnant and everything, but let me sing on the demo and everything like you do. But it just, it made me feel real special. And, I know y'all gonna be moving on and moving up, and y'all are gonna get real good people to sing up, back up for you and everything, but I need you to know it meant the world to me. Thank you so much, D.
DJ, come on, man. You gotta be there at 9 o'clock, right?
Calm your ass down, man. You gonna be there all night. I ain't scared.
I know.
Come on, man.
Wow, check it out.
Okay, look at DJ. I put some extra demos in the car, right, man? In case they have some label folk there. If they won't see these, they just gonna have to hit us back on it.
Man, I like that. I need to get one of those.
Hey. You alright, man?
You got your motor on, D?
Hold up a second.
Long before Empire, obviously we saw that there was a chemistry between Terrence and Taraji, and part of it is because of this movie. And John wasn't just a producer; he was a director, as we all know. And when you're a director and a producer have those, attributes. You go on that set, and you're there on that set every day. And while he's watching Craig put this film together, he's adding his own 2 cents. Some producers can sit back and just watch you do your thing, but as a director, he helped shape Craig put this film together. And my thing is that he brought Taraji onto this film, considering they had worked together on Baby Boy. But the thing about it is that, he showcased, you see this love scene here, and then you look back to some of the other movies that he's done, and the scenes that he creates with love, or at least helps put together with that movie. And then as I looked at this movie here, John went from directing to producing, then he started getting behind the scenes, and then as we saw later years, started doing Rebel on BET, then he did Snowfall. So there was a lot that he contributed to the scene in front of it, in terms of just being a director, and then stepping behind and shepherding, having more of a say, just being a director and listening to who your producers are. He became a producer. So that's why I chose this movie, because he helped produce this movie.
Okay, I wanted to go last because, of course, I wanted to hear whatever they said. I can use it. But a couple of things I have to say. I have a very unique relationship with John Singleton because our paths crossed a number of times in a number of different ways. Coming up in the early 90s as a young filmmaker wanting to make film, seeing Warrington and his brother making House Party and Spike Lee and seeing in Matty Rich, all those filmmakers she's talking about on that cover of Time magazine, those were my idols, those were my heroes. These are the people I wanted to be in, with doing what they're doing. And so it was great for me when I got to make my first film, the fact that John came, he was supportive, quiet as it's kept. He ended up dating one of the women in my film. But I got to know John through that person, that friend of mine, and know more of him as a man, and knew about that relationship and the things he was doing, and at that point for me, I had really admired what he was trying to do. Even if I didn't necessarily like every moment, every beat in every film, there was no denying, here's an artist who had an opportunity to say something, and he always had something to say. And I enjoyed, like Clayton alluded to, how he was talking about masculinity, about Black masculinity, how we see ourselves. He talked about family. And the film that really struck me, which is what I'm going to show a clip from, is Baby Boy. And Baby Boy is one of those films that, I think it may be forgotten by some people, but it's a really powerful film. And I have to mention, and there's a connection to this, a friend of mine who's a filmmaker, who his name is Frank Reyes. He once said to me, after seeing Baby Boy, he says, any man that says to you that they don't see themselves as Baby Boy is full of shit. And that's how he felt, and it's true, because Baby Boy is full of characters and situations you may or may not be familiar with, but you can see a little bit of yourself in everybody in that film. And as a man, one of the things that John Singleton did, I think, is really talk about masculinity, redefine it, look at it, take it apart. And I think he did that a number of times with a number of different films. But also, like what Wilson mentioned, is he supported other filmmakers. And in particular, this friend of mine, Frank Reyes, who was a filmmaker, who made a film called Illegal Tender.
All right.
And Illegal Tender is a film that John Singleton produced. Now, because Frank and I go back, I started, before I was actually making films, I used to do storyboards. And Frank was like, hey man, I want you to do storyboards for this film. So I kind of came out of retirement and sat on a beach in Puerto Rico and did storyboards. And not the worst gig in the world. But I got to, if you know anything about storyboards are sort of almost like comic books. They're all the panels. When you break down a scene, it's all got to be storyboarded for the action, where the camera goes. And the joke with the storyboard artists are that we get to direct the film before the director gets to direct the film, because we're talking with the DP and everything. But what was interesting for me in that film was John had a storyboard artist he really wanted to use that he'd been working with for a long time. Frank wanted to use me. So John said, you know what, let your guy do it, but I'm gonna have my guy do it too. Turned out later on that the guy who did the storyboards was the guy I went to junior high school and high school with, and we didn't even know we were working on the same film. So it all worked out well. But I did get to spend time with John, watching him mentor my friend, seeing that he would get involved in this film, that, why does he have a stake in this film that's about family, about manhood, about a bunch of things? And as Warrington so aptly put, to say black and Latino, you're really saying black twice. So I think that's how John saw it, and I think, again, even with Craig Brewer is somebody that you may or may not think that Singleton would support, but he did. And so Singleton, that says a lot about him as a filmmaker, not just what he wants to do personally, but I think any good producer produces films that they themselves would like to see. And I think that's something that John did. And what I also have to acknowledge is that John was a great writer. There are a lot of great directors who don't write. And John was a great writer. The scene that I'm going to show you is just from Baby Boy. It's just the opening scene. And what I love about it is that it sets the tone for the whole film. There's a little bit of a monologue there, you'll hear it, and it makes you think. And right away, any film that's going to make you think, it's not going to, have an explosion in the first, they always tell you, have first 3 minutes of the film, you got to grab the audience. He grabs you by making you think. So this is the clip.
She has a theory about the black man in America. She says that because of the system of racism, the black man in this country has been made to think of himself as a baby, a not yet fully formed being who has not realized his full potential. To support her claim, she offers the following. First off, what does a black man call his woman? Mama. Secondly, what does a black man call his closest acquaintances? His boys. And finally, what does a black man call his place of residence? The crib.
So this is the part that I think is the most interesting. We're going to have anyone who wants to speak go to the mic here and here. But before we do that, there are two special guests here that I want you to introduce. And if they care to speak, which I hope they will, we are graced and blessed and privileged to have with us the woman who won the Oscar for Best Costuming this past year, Ruth Carter. And also sitting here is somebody I really can't say enough about because he was the first black man to be a news anchor in the world. 1965. He's also the first black man to have a regular on-camera role in a prime time sitcom, 1952. The Phil Silver Show, if you guys remember Sergeant Bilko. He also went on to be the love interest of Danny Carroll and Julia, Pam Grier and Foxy Brown. He was a regular in McCloud, Battlestar Galactica, Terry Carter. Ruth, I'm so pleased. Ruth actually squeezed us in. She has to go to the airport, straight from the theater. So this is she has worked with so many great directors and has, I know, an affection for the artistry and the black film movement, because I met Ruth, by the way, in 1985, 84. 86. Exactly, 85. And she was doing work on School Days. And I still have my Mission College sweatshirt, but it doesn't fit me anymore. I wonder what happened. But Ruth, I want to put you on the spot. Is there anything you want to share about, if you come to the mic over here.
I knew John personally as well as professionally. He was like my brother. I was part of his family. He loved my sangria. And, whenever we were on location, I can't cook, but he would always ask me to come over to his house and cook. So I would, rehearse what I was going to cook the day before, and I'd go over and I'd make tacos and sangria, and he'd invite about 50 people over. So I'd end up going back to the grocery store, and I'm like, when is he going to give me some money for this? But he loved me, and I loved him, and we were a film family. And just as you were on set with John and doing your work, he would call you over and he'd tell you about another idea he had for another film. He was a master at multitasking, and he'd be on his phone at the monitor and answering text messages and emails and thinking of new film ideas. And while he's shooting the film in front of you, I did Rosewood with him. I did Shaft. I did Baby Boy, and we had a wonderful, wonderful relationship. He would come over my house if he had something to pitch to the studio, and he knew how I loved to do research and do layouts. So we'd sit in my dining room and we'd do layouts together. And he was all, I would do the littlest, tiniest thing, and he'd say, "Oh, that's so great," "Oh, Ruthie," and he'd squeeze my cheeks, like I was 12 years old. And I really, really loved that guy. He believed in a film family. When I first met him, he was on a panel with Spike Lee, and this was the late 80s. He hadn't really graduated from USC when he did Boys in the Hood. He was just about to graduate. I mean, he had so many stories in him. He couldn't wait to get out of school and tell his film stories. But he was on he was listening to a panel with Robert Townsend and Spike Lee, and I was in the audience, and Spike Lee crushed Robert Townsend, we all thought, in the panel discussion. And afterwards he ran up to me and he said, I'm a filmmaker, I'm about to graduate from USC, I love your work and I want to work with you. And I just remember looking back at this young man and thinking he had the same promise as Spike Lee did, like he was a new generation of filmmakers coming through. And I just said, call me and I'll help you. But I was doing a lot of films with, I bounced back and forth between Spike Lee. I did 14 films with Spike Lee, not to mention all the other little projects we've done in between. And I bounced back and forth between New York, doing New York stories, and LA, doing broad comedies. I did I'm Gonna Get You Sucker and The 5 Heartbeats, and I was quite busy all the time. And John wanted me to do Boys in the Hood, and I was, back in New York doing probably Crooklyn or something with Spike Lee. So I missed that one, but I remember visiting the set and really understanding the life in Los Angeles, the urban landscape in Los Angeles, the gang culture of Los Angeles, especially late 80s, early 90s. It was volatile. It was volatile for a black man to live in South Central, and John Singleton was very close to that dynamic and close to that story, and was telling it very authentically. We all knew it, living there and being a filmmaker on independent films in Los Angeles, you quite often found yourself in the middle of, you know, a hood where you had to like check what color you were wearing, or if you were male especially. And you know, we all knew where to get those clothes from the Western surplus, where you would get the oversized Wranglers and everything was a 3X, a 2X, a 4X. So I have to say that, you know, his stories were simple, but he was a very complex man. He was a very intelligent filmmaker. You'd see him at almost any gathering. It didn't matter who it was. He would have a deep discussion with filmmakers in the room, and he was really well studied. And I love that guy, and I'm really, really missing him. Thank you.
And please, a round of applause for Ruth Carter, Oscar winner. I wanted to just, before we move back to the critics, a historical point of view, and Terry Carr is welcome, and also Rafe Kamal is welcome to talk about black film as a cycle, as a generation, and how John Singleton fit in that cycle. But they're not prepared. I can go back to the critics. They get paid for this. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, did we want to allow people, if they had things they wanted to say about his film or anything, come up?
Yes, but you must come to the mic. You have to come to the mic.
We'll start here on the right because you're closer. There you go. And then we'll go to you.
I had the fortune of...
and wait, who are you?
My name is Raul Roach, and
That's right. Round of applause. Round of applause.
I was fortunate to witness the birth of John as a filmmaker. I worked with John on Boys in the Hood. I was a music supervisor. Into the mic. The mic? Okay, I'm sorry. I was a music supervisor on Boys in the Hood, and it was interesting because Frank Price, who was the president of Sony at that time, had a real commitment to making sure that young people of color came into the business. And so John Singleton and Deborah Martin Chase, who had left Avon as their counsel to come to California to accept no money, and he brought her in as his intern. And this was their first project that they worked on together. And, you know, it was difficult. It was difficult even for Frank, who was the head of the studio at that time. The reason we became involved, Quincy Jones, who I worked with at the time, I worked over at Quest Records, and we picked up the soundtrack. But it wasn't that we just picked up the soundtrack. We had to pay for the music because Columbia would not put up any money for the music. So we paid for the music for the film, and that's how the music got completed for the film, which is strange looking back on it. But it was a big risk for Frank and for everyone involved, because he was this kid fresh out of college, and you know, he was going to get a major film deal at a major studio. And so, you know, John was just so sincere, you know, in his love for filmmaking, his love for the visual art of filmmaking, and his commitment to the stories of his community, which he really told with a kind of authenticity. And so one little anecdote I can share is the first assembled film came back, and they cut out the mother of the main character, of Trey. And you know, everybody was like, well, they were trying to save, you know, a few minutes on the film, and says, everybody okay with the mother missing? And you know, I spoke up, and Deborah backed me up, that, you know, it's so important to show parents working together, raising a black son, and how important that is, that it could not be taken back from the film. I appreciated the opportunity to work with John, to see you know, his growth and his enthusiasm and him putting that project together. And it really was a groundbreaking piece. And looking back on it now, how fresh. Then it was such a risk. You know, we were doing constant screenings for artists to try and convince them to have their music be a part of the film, because nobody knew who he was, nobody cared. There wasn't a whole lot of money in the film. You know, we had a $250,000 budget for all of the music, and included the score and the source music and the soundtrack. So, you know, we picked up a lot of B-sides, which became hits. You know, Tony, Tony, Tony. They're like, yeah, but we put that on our album so you can have it. But it was exciting. John was quite an artist, an incredible visionary, and to see him grow. I've been very fortunate. I went to high school with Deborah Martin Chase. I went to summer camp with Ruthie Carter in Amherst, Massachusetts. But I think the world is missing John, but we have these gems that he created, and I'm so glad you guys are really pointing out, you know, how special he was as a filmmaker and as a person committed to his community and the stories of African American culture. Thanks.
Okay, I just wanted to say a few things.
And you should introduce yourself.
My name's Nathaniel. I grew up in East Harlem, born and raised.
Speaking to the mic, please.
So I looked around the room, and I'm probably one of the youngest people here, if not the youngest person here. I was born in '95, and so John Singleton movies impacted me also. Movies like Boys in the Hood, Baby Boy, and whatnot. Movies that I could recite line for line, just not, you know, enjoying the movie. Just the other day, don't laugh at me, y'all. I just watched High and Learning for the first time, and it was like mind-boggling to me how relevant the movie still is today. And so I just felt like I owed it to John. Obviously, I'll never get to meet John, but as an inspiring filmmaker, I feel like I owe this to John to be here today. I used to tell a member of my family that I wanted to be like a filmmaker and a filmer, and he would tell me that there's not a lot of black people, not a lot of African Americans in that field, and I always thought in my mind that John Singleton probably heard worse things than that, being at the time period that he wanted to be a filmmaker. So, yeah, again, obviously I would get the chance to meet John Singleton, but I feel like I owe it to him to be here today. So, thank you.
How's everyone today? Okay, my name is Byron Franklin. I'm from Queens, not far from here, and John Singleton is a frat brother of mine of Kappa Alpha Psi. Any noobs in that? Well, there's one chapter invisible now. But the story I just like to tell, I was in law school in University of Baltimore when Boys in the Hood came out, and he was doing pre-screenings all over the country, and I guess majority black cities or whatever. And we were invited to the Harbor Theater down at the Harbor in Maryland, and John Singleton, he actually came, and he spoke before the movie, and then he came and spoke after. And I had never, before or after a major film like that, the director had never been at the movie theater speaking before and after the movie. But one thing I remember him doing is that the scene where he talked about the scene when they go back and kill the guys who killed Ice Cube's brother, and in the theater when they would do it, people were cheering, and he said, how many people were cheering for that? And after the movie was over, and some people said, yeah, he said, that's not something to cheer for. They said that those black men killed other black men. This is what we're here to increase the peace. And it just kind of, the people who were cheering just felt so bad. But it woke them up, I think, and it was just a deep moment, and just say, Faidu forever.
I want to say something real quick to the young brother that was over here, born in 1995. Kills me that it's 95. But you said something during there, and I think it's very important for any young people that are in here that were born in the 90s, and we're going to get people that are going to be born later in life. And never be ashamed that you haven't seen something like higher learning yet, but found it now. And I think what we tend to do, and I see this a lot within the film critic community, is that we put these barriers and qualifying factors upon each other. But like, if you've never seen New Jack City, you're not real black. You know, like we do stuff like that all the time, and we all have
that's true.
we all have our cinematic blind spots, and I'm just glad that you were able to find higher learning. Because listen, I stroll through channels all day, and I haven't really stumbled across higher learning yet. You know, it's hard to find.
I had to go look for it.
Yeah, it's a lot of times you have to go look for it. You know, and a lot of that all is going to tie into education. You know, our young people need to be educated in filmmaking from all different backgrounds, and I just want to stress that, and thank you for finding higher learning, and look for all the cinematic gems that you can that were pre-1995 and even stuff that's now that's going to be important to your cinematic upbringing through this industry.
And I can't talk about cinematic upbringing and history. I cannot allow this occasion to pass without the man who I feel is the founder of Black independent cinema. Mike and I was with him, a month ago?
Yes, we were.
The Godfather, Melvin Van Peebles. Beginning of the beginning.
Well, you know, I do want to say one thing. The interesting thing about John Singleton for me, looking back, is still kind of hard to believe that he's gone, you know, because, you know, there aren't that many filmmakers of color, not only who have a track record, who have made successful films and gotten accolades, but have the power to say, okay, I'm going to produce somebody else's film you never heard of, and I'm going to help that get made. There aren't a lot of people who can do that, period, but definitely people of color. There are few and far between who can do that. And he was one of the first to do it, you know, not to disparage any of his contemporaries, but that says a lot to me about something Clayton mentioned also, just about his commitment to film and what he wants to do. But I am curious for you, what you think of all the films that he's done and how strong the female characters are. Even in the films he produces, he really, you know, he clearly has a love for women.
So what I will say is I was born in 1990, so don't feel bad. And the first and last time that I met John Singleton was, I think, 2017 at the American Black Film Festival. And he was there for Snowfall and for Rebel. And I don't know if you guys remember Rebel. It was on BET for one season, and it had a female protagonist. And she was a kind of like a PI, and she was really smart and really badass. And talking with him about this film, and he really said he always had this idea. He always had ideas. We spoke about how he had the idea for Baby Boy, and he wanted to meet with Tupac about it. But Tupac, I think, died, a day or two before they were supposed to meet and discuss the film, so it didn't come out until 2001, I believe. But he had the idea for Baby Boy after seeing Tupac perform, I think, either in Juice or in Poetic Justice. But he never shoved, you know, he wasn't perfect, but he never shoved Black women in the background. We always got a voice, and that was so important for me. Coming into his films, like you, I wasn't allowed to watch television growing up. I lived in a Nigerian household, so it was very, very strict. We could only read books and kind of watch movies that my father allowed us to watch, but it was also his introduction into American culture. So he loved film, and that's how I came to love film, and watching Higher Learning and Baby Boy and Boys in the Hood and Poetic Justice and all of these films, Four Brothers, later on in my life as well, really sort of inspired me to talk about films and to learn the history and the theory behind them. And as far as women goes, I think Rebel in particular, though it's not well known and it didn't really get a chance to shine, it really showed that he always had Black women at the forefront. Even, you know, with Taraji's character in Baby Boy, she's very no nonsense, maybe even a little bit loud, but she doesn't back down, and she's always herself. She's always authentic, and that's always been, I think, very important to him. He was, like so many people have said, always very open. Even talking with me, I'm a relatively young film critic, and I'm a woman as well, but he didn't treat me any differently than he would any of these gentlemen up here. So that was really important for me. He was always digging for new characters, always digging for new talent, which is why he found, I can't think of the actress's name who did Rebel, which I'm really frustrated about. But she's, you know, in her 30s, she wasn't some young sort of, you know, starlet. He went and found her because she was super talented and had been working in the industry, and that's something he always did over the course of his career.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned.
I want to make sure about the table.
Oh, okay. I just want to say, we have to acknowledge that if it weren't for John Singleton, we wouldn't have Ice Cube as an actor, writer, director, producer. We wouldn't have Tyrese. You know, he could see something in somebody who maybe never acted before, and say, you know what, you're going to have presence on film.
Yeah, and I think he did it, especially with people that, if you look from 50,000 Feet, had no right being in a movie yet.
Right.
Like Ice Cube in the middle of NWA Phenomenon, he's like, here, go do Boys in the Hood and go knock it out of the park. You know, give Tupac poetic justice. You know, give Andre 3000 Four Brothers. You know, like it's just always. I just said Andre 3000. Call myself. Yeah, he just gave an opportunity to people that you just don't normally see, and I think so. Obviously, we're always going to say that, you know, a lot of filmmakers owe so much to him, because like they kind of follow in those footsteps, especially as someone who follows the Academy Awards like rigorously. And Ruthie Carter, I love you, by the way, like queen. People, you know, when he came on the scene with the Academy Award nomination, everyone was like so amazed by it. And then it quickly became a trend that black critics started seeing, that the Academy loves black movies when it shows black people like in torture, or they're like in slavery or in bondage or something. That's another whole thing. But then the what we love to see is that it evolves over time, and that's why Black Panther becomes such a big deal. That's why last year, If Beale Street Could Talk was like the most beautiful thing like I probably ever seen, because it was black love in a way that didn't revolve around someone like getting shot and dying and things like that. So John Singleton tapped into something very early on and kept it going.
Although he did go to jail, so.
And you have something you want to say?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to say peace to John Singleton. If it weren't for him, you know, I don't think that, in part, because he made such great films.
But I know who you are, but let the room know who you are.
Yeah, you got to make films now. Anyway, my name is Eddie Bailey, and I am a filmmaker here in New York City. As a matter of fact, my film premiered here. It's called Memphis Magic, back in July. So thank you to Warrington for that. But the first time that I was introduced to John Singleton was in '91. My mother took me to go see Boys in the Hood. She said, this is an important film. You have to see this film. And I was 11 years old back then, but it was good for me to see it because I particularly liked the way that Singleton really portrayed the parents, right? So they were divorced, but you know, they worked together for the child's sake. And I really appreciated that, and just watching Trey grow up into the young man that, you know, he came to be. And so I respect John Singleton for just making good black films. Not only that, but Higher Learning, like the young man said, Baby Boy, which is my favorite, and you know, many others that he made. So thank you.
I start thinking back now, you start thinking about the Fast and Furious franchise. You know, we think about the first one, and you're like, okay, it's an okay movie. But then John did a second one, and it grossed over $100 million.
And it was the first black director film to do that.
Yeah.
I'll defer on that one.
Okay, all right. Third grade.
Third grade.
Right.
Come on now.
I'm sorry.
Open to the house. Open to the house.
Anyway, but when you think about, you know, Fast and the Furious, you think about the second film, because once they hit $100 million, that's what told the producers in the studios, we've got a franchise here. And granted, they did the third one and the fourth one, and it is what it is now, but you know, who knows where that second film goes if it didn't make that $100 million barrier, you know. And for John, you gotta remember, like, Boys in the Hood was nominated, and then he had Higher Learning. But it's not like any of those movies made $80 million that you're now going to give him $100 million. You know, you're going to give him a film that makes $100 million. So he was able to show that like he can go from doing his own vision to be put on a franchise and, you know, working with those characters and then blowing it up and bringing back Tyrese.
Absolutely.
Sir. Hi, my name is Pierre Edouard, and right before you spoke, I stood up because I kept thinking, I said, they keep saying Black Films, one of the largest franchises in the world in the history of film is still ongoing, and everyone thought it was dead because Vin Diesel walked away from Fast and Furious right before they was going to do the second one. John Singleton was signed on as the director after Rob Cohen also left. And over time, Vin Diesel's gone. He was the cash cow. He was the one that everybody looked at was about to become the next big thing in Hollywood. So what was going to happen to that franchise? Everybody thought it was dead. He brings Tyrese along. Ja Rule declines, so he brings Ludacris along, and those two are still huge parts of the franchise. You mentioned the third movie, and the third movie practically almost killed it. Tokyo Drift almost killed it. And it had very little connection to the second one, very little connection to the first one, but when they brought it back for the fourth, they brought the two worlds together, the first and the second movie, and then by the time the fifth movie came along, it became something else. So everybody keeps saying Black films, but I just keep thinking about the effects that, as you were saying, of John Singleton's work on Too Fast, Too Furious, which was at one point very, I would say some people kind of like looked down on it for a little bit, but now people are appreciating it more and more and more as time goes on. So it's just something that just kept sticking out in my mind because it's a worldwide phenomenon. And he didn't just, I mean, he opened up that world. They revisited things that he did. It's very similar to what, who did the first Batman movie? Who was the director that did the first Batman?
Burton.
Tim Burton. Tim Burton gave DC a template that they're still following to this day. When he did the first Batman film, everything, their whole animated universe is based on the simple visual scapes that he created back in 1988. And I'm thinking about John
on the topic of Fast and Furious, I want to give a shout out to the last edition, which F. Gary Gray, another brother, did. That became, what, one point, how much, $1 billion?
Over $1 billion.
Yeah, over $1 billion. So clearly, in our community, there is directing talent of color, you know, particularly in this case, African Americans who deliver at the box office. This is open for.
Thank you.
Back to the critics.
Okay. What were you going to say, Wilson? You started something. All right, well,
let me say something to you guys.
Goodbye, Your Majesty. I love you.
Goodbye.
What I want to say to you guys is thank you, because there was a decade or more when filmmakers were making work, and what we did, it was the interpretation and critique of it was outside of our community. You know, so thank you for showing up. I don't always agree, but thank you for showing up, because it is very troubling to be an artist to have someone evaluate your work who may have no cultural insight in what you do.
You know, it's funny you say that. I have to say, Warrington, and I know everybody here will agree with me. I think cultural insight is important, especially when we're talking about representation for a lot of people, you know, who don't have connection to other races, other cultures, other religions, other just people who are different than them. A movie or a TV show may be the first time you get a chance to. And if that viewpoint or that story is completely biased by someone else who has a very narrow, it's just going to reinforce this narrow view you already had. You know, and there are tons of examples of movies that have changed the way we look at something and changed the way we look at ourselves. And I think films are always, films or stories are always a reflection of the culture they spring from and the times they come from. But a great film, like you mentioned with Higher Learning was, what was that, 95?
95.
95, so that was 24 years ago. and it's just as relevant as if it was made this past summer. So that tells you that he's not just telling black stories, he's telling stories about the human condition. He's telling stories about what it is to be a man, be a woman, be a parent, be a brother, be a sister, be a family member, to lose someone, loss, all the themes of things that all the greatest stories ever told are using.
Yeah, and I think especially in our community, we're chasing, you know, the first this, the first that.
Right.
You know, John was first, you know, director nominated and things like that. Last year, 2000, you would probably correct me, Wilson, I think last year, 2018, top 100 films of the year, 16 were directed by black directors, and that's triple from the year prior.
Right.
You know, so I think as we grow into this, or as Hollywood becomes more aware, hopefully, of more representation and seeing that, I think we'll see John's vision come to fruition through new filmmakers and new stories that are going to be made that are going to speak to all different people. Because always contrary, you know, black people go to the movies. You know, and that's always been like,
so do Puerto Rican people.
Yeah, so do Puerto Rican.
But you know, you think about it, it's not always easy for a black director to get his films greenlit.
Yeah.
So earlier, someone mentioned 9 films in under 30 years. You know, you can't find, you know, with the exception of Spike Lee and maybe Tyler Perry, other filmmakers who have had 9 films, but not just 9 films, but produced at least 2. When you think of Hustle and Flow, Illegal Tender, and then, you know, John did it. You know, he started off with 24, and then you're like, okay, where are we gonna go by the time he hits 50 or so forth? But he's had 9 films. He's produced 2 films at least. He's had TV series. You know, we lost a lot. You know, and under, you know, for somebody under, you know, who was just under, you know, around 50 years old, and that's gonna be missed. So there's a hole right there, and hopefully somebody's gonna pick up and says, okay, I want to be this John Singleton in terms of, you know, doing films, producing films, putting something on TV, because now you can do TV and film, you know, as opposed to you couldn't do both, you know, and just, you know, creating that brand that like people can see, like, okay, you know, bringing it back to the community, whether it's introducing new talent or bringing something to the community that they know, okay, this is our film as opposed to something for the studio.
Yeah.
And I have to say, we're gonna let this person talk, but it's sad to say to echo everything everybody's saying. What John Singleton always did is make films that were socially relevant. And that's not an easy thing, because not every film that makes a lot of money or makes any money is socially relevant.
Yeah. Thank you, Warrington, for putting this together. My name is Dennis Paul, and thank you to the critics who've spoken.
Dennis Paul, what's your connection here?
I'm a co-trustee with Warrington here at the museum, and so I'm so excited to see, especially people who've never been here before, for you all to be here. Thanks for visiting today. Like Warrington said, come back. Boys in the Hood had real impact on me. I grew up in Washington, D.C., so I grew up in a city that was predominantly black. And my friends at school and guys that I hung out with, a lot of them were black. But for whatever reason, until that film came out, I hadn't gone to the movies with my friends, with my black friends, and seen a film that was more about them than it was about me. And I remember, not just visually, but the gentleman, Mr. Roach, who I guess was the music supervisor there. I mean, culturally and musically, the film was groundbreaking for my generation. Now, for other generations, as Warrington pointed out, there's other films that have been made, but for my generation growing up in that time, it was the first film, I think, for us that really, you know, like I said, brought us into understand, see another side of our friends who were black, and to understand what it meant to them, the music and the filmmaking. I also was struck listening to you guys talk, the critics today. I'm wondering if there are so many important films that have been coming out recently. You talked about them, critically important films. At the time, if you look back, I mean, obviously you all are too young to know, but what was the critical response at the time to the film? What were critics saying about it? Did they see it in the way that we're seeing it today?
I think, yeah, at the time, I think my memory of it was that, again, as a filmmaker, I was paying attention. I wasn't a critic then, but my memory and everybody else here can, you know, of course, if they're old enough, can share their memory, because clearly I'm old, all right, because I still remember in '91. But I remember that the film came out, and the talk was about, you know, this new generation of filmmakers and the importance of these kinds of films. And the biggest thing I remember is that this film, you know, it was talked about on all these different levels. He was on all the talk shows. He was articulate. He was smart. He had comebacks for everything. You know, we all had heard the story. He was barely out of school. So it was revolutionary. And to think that still, that was 1991. It's almost, what is it, almost 30 years later now? He's still the youngest director of any color to be nominated. So that's hugely significant, just him as a storyteller. And I think, especially I remember that, just that here it is, not only is he the first black, but he's the youngest. So that says a lot about just the power that was inside him. That's what I remember.
Yeah, that was actually the first Oscars I ever watched that I can remember watching. It's 1991. And that whole year was a first of everything. Beauty and the Beast was nominated for Best Picture that year, first animated film to do that. It's our last horror film to win Best Picture, Silence of the Lambs. So that whole year was just like kicked the door open on filmmaking for everything, genre breaking, stories that were being told, and much like what happens in Hollywood, once we make one great stride, halts for a good minute, and then they're like, all right, can we go back to the status quo? Like, here's Unforgiven next year, and do our normal thing. And then, you know, then we get 12 Years a Slave that wins Best Picture, and it's a big deal. And then we're halted again, and then Moonlight comes. You know, there's always just this stop and go. And at the time, like, in Hollywood, I think now we're seeing momentum, and I think we're keeping it sorta right now, especially in the female filmmaker side. You know, we're just looking for more voices to come to the table, but you need that again through education. You need to go to these communities in Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, you know, where you can talk to a young black student, and it's great to want to become the next Denzel Washington. Like that's a great thing to strive for, to make your goal. But you could be the next Bradford Young. You could be the next Ruth E. Carter. You could be the next Joy McMillan and edit things. You know, like you can do these things, but if they don't know, you can't expect it to happen for them. So we have to reinvest that community, reinvest into it, so then they can know that this is possible for them.
Big D.
Hi, my name is Darren Spake. I met John at an event that, for me, changed my life. And that was in Acapulco, at the Acapulco Black Film Festival. And that was in 2000. And I met him because there was a screening of Baby Boy taking place. And in the movie theater, we're sitting there. I didn't know John was sitting there. I'm just sitting in the theater. And there was a scene where Snoop prepares. And this was the first time that we kind of seen Snoop he was so thin. And the person sitting next to me yelled out, "Snoop needs to eat a sandwich." And the whole theater broke up in laugh. And unbeknownst to me, the gentleman sitting in front of me turned to me and gave me a high five. I guess he thought I was the one that told the joke. So after the movie, the lights came on, and it was John Singleton that was the gentleman that turned to gave me a high five. So we went out into the lobby, and people were hanging out and talking, and then everybody went back to the Hilton Hotel. And this experience, for me, I was there 5 days. I laid down, not go to sleep, I laid down 1 hour each day. It was the most content that I have ever been. And this is where I really, at the end of it, really formally met Warrington Hutland. But that night after the movie, we're in the hotel lobby, and I'm like, oh man, that's John Singleton. I noticed right away, to me, law enforcement, or was, he seemed introverted. And here are all these actresses that's clamoring around and looking at him. So what I did, I started saying, hey, listen, I know John, come on, you can come up and meet him. And just started introducing actresses to him. And he would graces, take their pictures, everything. When that lobby cleared out a little bit, he said to me, yo, where you going? I said, I'm not going nowhere. He goes, all right, come with me. For 5 days, John would call me, and I hung out with him. He introduced me to Miss Henson, which he called Monkey. I'm like, why is he calling this woman Monkey? She's fine, she's the leading actress. And I said, John, why are you calling that? He goes, oh, she got long arms. And I was like, wow. But what was really interesting to me about John, and it was, here's a man that had this great vision of making movies, but he had very poor eyesight. When he would read something, he would literally put it up to his face. I'm like, man, he has great vision to make the movies, but yet he has poor physical eyesight, which maybe would help him have such great vision. So even after that experience, 9/11 hit. He called me up, said, hey, D, I need to come to New York City. Would you mind taking me down to the area? I said, no problem, John. He flew in, he called me up. We went through the 9/11 area, which me being a law enforcement officer, I saw what took place. But going down there myself, I could not tell my bearings. I didn't realize that the Twin Towers, or how much you rely on physical objects to tell you where you were at. So anyway, we did that, and every time he came to New York, he would call me. So, I mean, to me, I miss him. And one of the things that he did for me during the Acapulco Film Festival, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew I liked movies, and I took a chance and went. And I had wrote a script that wasn't even in a script form, but he read it, and he told me, he goes, D, this has never been done before. And I held on to that and never turned it into script form to this recently. And I think for me, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to work on it, and I'm going to submit it in honor of John. Thank you very much.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions from the group. Otherwise, wrap us up.
Okay, I'll wrap it up. I guess I would ask what, and I'm going to ask each of you this. What do you think will be the most lasting aspect of what John Singleton did for film, for black film, just, for film, for storytelling?
I think the fact that, the films that he's done so far are always going to be lasting. From Boys in the Hood, from, where the things get relevant now, like Higher Learning, as we talked about, into the, Snowfall still going on. So when you start thinking back, and you always look back to films, and even though those directors and actors are dead, you're still going to think back because they have an impact. You're going to think back, especially within the black community, Boys in the Hood. You're going to think about Poetic Justice because there's Tupac. The actors that he brought onto these films are still working, and so long as they're working, his legacy continues. Singing, working, his legacy is going to continue because they're still working, and they are, as they say, the fruit of the tree. So he put them on, and they're going to continue to grow. And when you start thinking back, how did they start? Singleton's name is always going to come up.
Very true.
As an awards guy, and the reason why I find the Oscars so important, and I think it's easy for people to say, they never nominate anything, they don't matter, yada yada. The Oscars represent the year, and it's not so much about what was nominated, about what wasn't and what lost. And those become the stories that last over time. People know Citizen Kane and didn't win Best Picture. Anyone remember what did that year?
No.
How Green Was My Valley, and no one cares, right? No one cares at all. But sorry. So I look at that now and I say that the future, the legacy that he'll leave behind is going to be in the young people that will discover it by accident when they're just sitting home on a Saturday night and Boys in the Hood finally plays on TV so they can watch it. But then we'll get to see the evolution of filmmaking with hints of him in it forever. Straight Outta Compton is such a great film because it's F. Gary Gray, who we probably wouldn't have gotten any other way. But then we even get to, you know, see Ice Cube and his son play him, and, you know, the origins of Ba Felicia. You know, we get to see comedies come out of Boys in the Hood, like Don't Be a Menace in South Central Without Drinking Your Juice in the Hood. Like that comes because of films like this. So forever we'll always have the inklings of him, the inklings of his films, and any great, you'll always see a piece of them in every kind of interaction you do with movies here on out.
And what's most important for me is the fact that he was unapologetically Black. For me, I'm a film critic, but I'm a Black female film critic. My perspective about films is because I was born in the 90s on the south side of Chicago, and that's sort of where my world begins. And he was like that as well, and what he does is, he never explains anything to the audience. He just invites you into that world, first of all, and he sort of allows a blueprint to happen. He allows Philip Humans, who is now 19, to sort of win Tribeca this year with Burning K, which is very Black, set in the 90s. And it's about basically a woman who's struggling with her pastor and her son. It's very interesting and so textured, very Louisiana. He allows new filmmakers to be themselves because he's laid this blueprint out. He never tries, even when he did the franchise films, it's still Black. Bringing in Tyrese, bringing in Ludacris, those were important moves that he made. So for me, it's not just about sort of, you know, the stories that he told, but it's about the legacy that he's able to leave in the wake of that, even with Snowfall, which is really unpacking the birth of the crack cocaine epidemic in this country. That is going to continue on, hopefully, though he's no longer with us. Allowing himself to even step into the television realm was so important, and it was so important that he did it when he did.
Well, I have to concur with everything you said, and I think the most important point, and I guess just kind of coalescing what you all said, is just that the whole, what I said before about showing the why, not just the what. We could show the crack cocaine, we could just show victims, but we might not really unpack it. We might not really get to understand how this happened, who's really affected, what it really means. That's the kind of filmmaker he was, where he makes you understand the things that maybe you thought you understood, but you really don't. And I also have to say that there are filmmakers who have made 50 films, and not one of them is as classic as Boys in the Hood, or Baby Boy, and I just got to share one more, my last John Singleton story. I remember going to see Ving Rhames.
Which one?
No, the one in Florida.
Rosewood?
Okay, Rosewood. I remember going to see Rosewood in a theater, and I wasn't a critic at the time. And I remember going to see it in a mixed audience. And I remember, if you've ever seen the film, it's about, let's just say, a racial uprising in the South. And
true story.
It's a true story, yes it is. And there's a point in the film where the Black people decide they're going to defend themselves, and you know, Ving Rhames kind of plays this Clint Eastwood character. And at a certain point, you see all the Black people getting back and shooting and killing all these, you know, evil white people. And, you know, the audience is cheering, except the white people. And it was palpable, you know, and it was the first time I realized why Black historical films don't do well, because everybody's a little bit uncomfortable, because it's not like, you know, you look at something, the Holocaust, that happened then over there. This is like, wow, this is still happening now. And that was John. He wasn't afraid to be in your face with something, good or bad, and make you feel something. And I think that that's what all great art should do.
Oh, you want the last word?
No, I don't want the last word. I'm going to ask a question.
Okay.
And it just occurred to me, and I'm sure you guys already know this, so maybe you can help me. Is there currently a book or a really great in-depth article that really shows the DNA of Black cinema? Because John turned on so many actors and actresses and behind the scenes people of color. Is there somebody working on something like that? Because I think it would be an inspiration to young filmmakers to know how people made space.
We just caucus, and we think for 20th century Black cinema. It's Donald Vogel's, Toms, Coons, Mulattoes, Mammies, and Bucks.
Yes.
for what's happening now, probably not. You
Not
guys,
yet.
one of you guys have to write
Yeah,
it.
well, we're gonna work
Well,
on
also
it.
Ed Guerrero, I think it's Black Film in America.
Yeah.
And Black City Cinema.
I'm going to contest that. But I will take the last word, which is.
Wait, did you want to say something?
No, he's
just hanging out.
working. So, I really want you guys to come back, and it's not an open, free. It's a hooked invitation because the last Friday of every month we have a series here that I curate called "Changing the Picture." It's funded by Time Warner. As always, a film by a person of color, challenging the normal representations. And the next one is actually next week. It's people of color. So it's a brother named Lawrence Chow. It's a short drama called Justice for Vincent. It's about the murder of Vincent Chin, which happened 20 years ago, and nobody was brought to justice. And he's going to be here. I framed this program next week as a discussion about activist filmmaking. So I've invited Rashad, who is the in charge of the creative division of Color of Change. So we're going to talk about filmmaking, activist filmmaking. So everybody's here. Please come back. And please come back every month. Thank you so much. Thank you guys. Oh, let's take a picture. Who got the camera? Who got the camera? Facebook?
Take it with this.
Oh, this. There we go.
You don't mind.
I got Bill here.
Oh, it's just.
Come on, Mike.
Now, can you get this in the background?
Oh.
This camera must be really good. No flash.
I know, right? No, we got light on it.
Can you check one for me?
Yeah, sure do. My phone's just turned off, so forget it.
Oh, really?
I'll be texting.
Oh,
I'll give you money.
You didn't pay the bill?
Oh.
Okay, you paid the bill. All right, brother. Okay, man. Okay, okay. Okay, cool, man. Okay, now look like everybody say cheese. Cool.
Thank you.
Good job. You got it.
So what's next video?
I have Latin on Monday.
One more.
I have this one's for the ladies on Wednesday.
One more.
Gene, right?
Yeah.
Mike. One more.
Yeah, they sent me an email. He's like,
What's that? Okay.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, guys.
It's so great.
Cheese.
We're going to screen Boys in the Hood.
Thank you.
yeah, like he can. I gotta put something up on that.
So I'm gonna see it.
At least I feel good now. I feel good that he's emailing you.
He was like, oh, you got to come to Brooklyn? And I was like,
He's like, I missed you at the screening.
he was in Brooklyn. I'm not going to Brooklyn on Friday.
See you in a minute.
Oh my goodness, how are you? I haven't seen you since something else. Oh, she's a dude. She's got the seat now.
I have it written down.
Yeah, he was with us. Okay. So how you doing? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, well, it's not how you live out here.
I live in Harlem.
You live in Harlem. I'm in Harlem.
I live in Harlem.
So, I just shot a gospel concert film.
Yeah.
I shot a gospel concert.
Okay.
I just shot a gospel concert film, like similar to Race and Lyrics by Alice Wine. Saying it's about an hour and 10 minutes. It's traditional gospel. I'm talking to Black Amazon Choir. It's a concert film. It's a concert film. Where you got the choir singing and stuff like that. So how can I want you to look at the film. I'll give it right. Yeah. I need you to do a road trip. LinkedIn, Memphis Magic. Yeah. So, somebody got a chance to check it out. Check it out. This came out in February. I'm not sure.
You was right, your mom was right to get you out.
Sorry, folks, we gotta clean up here.
How you doing, brother? Yeah, man. Yo, yeah, man. This is what